so much for being on Attribution Time. I'm stoked for every person that joins. So everyone who hears this knows I say the same thing, but I get to learn from incredible people like yourself. So thank you for being on Attribution Time today.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm excited. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just, we were just talking and I was sharing like, these are very impromptu. For those who don't know, like none of this is actually planned. We kind of just meet and we talk, and because I like the organic nature of it. So you are the CEO or co-founder and CEO of Paramark.com. We'll get into a little bit what that is, because I'm really interested to see how your company is helping solve for attribution, or even what those conversations potentially look like. Maybe we're not solving, maybe we're having different conversations. So really excited to jump in, but you have a good history of tracking attribution. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. So, I'm one of those folks who went from engineering to product to growth to marketing, which I feel like is a little bit atypical, or I don't know, maybe. And, even when I was sort of an engineer or a product manager running experiments, there was always a question of, hey, what's working, what's not working, and how do we do more? And how do you measure that experiment that you ran on the website or in the onboarding flow or on the checkout flow? And is it actually going to replicate when we go from, an experiment to rolling it out site-wide? So this concept of, measurement has always been top of mind for me. And whether you look at experimentation, whether you look at, path to conversion, whether you call it incrementality, whether you call it attribution. There's a lot of words in the industry, but something that I've always been passionate about.
Yeah. I think that's a great call out. Yeah, most people I talk to, they kind of get into either analytics, or they come in from a marketing side of MOPS and being able to have to do first touch. So I think you're the first of going from the engineering side into this area in which you live in now, that I've spoken to. But to your point, like that is something that I often process through as well, of in theory, and especially as with data and where it's at now, we can track so much, we can measure so much, and everyone is bidding for what is valuable, what was their impact. Even if it's internal processes, you have to be able to show value, right? That makes the company realize that, right?
I think what's happened specifically in the last couple of years with all the changes in tech valuations and the market and the talk of recession, which never really kind of came, right? But what's happened is there's a lot more scrutiny on what is working and what is not working. And the leeway that you got in the ZIRP times, right, the zero interest rate times, the leeway is no longer there. The leash is like much tighter. So whether you're a marketer, whether you're a sales leader, whether you're a product person, you have to be able to show impact in a financial sense. Otherwise, the board and the execs are not going to be able to put money there because capital is no longer free. And so the scrutiny's gotten a lot tighter, which I think is good, right? Like we just got away from the fundamentals, and now we're like, okay, a business has to make money. Oh yes, it does.
That's right. Yeah, even those who are those capital firms are still like, now they're kind of like, okay, we know now that this is upticking, we need to start selling, or we need to start like making our profit on these things after we held tight for these years. I think that, and then what's also accelerating some of this measurement is the AI component, and just the acceleration of people being able to do things in a much faster time, because AI is just accelerated in the last year. I mean, that whole process. And so I think that's really interesting as well, of yes, you got to show value, but there's also the side of like, hey, we can make your job much more efficient by doing this. And so if you're not able to do that, like we can kind of fill in some of these pieces. I'm not saying it's going to take over and like
totally
finish people's jobs, but it should accelerate your job. It should accelerate your career as well.
Yeah, I think this is like we're all in the middle of it, right? Like I use AI tools all the time. I use AI tools for video editing. I use AI tools for, improving my content on social. I'm not using it for generating net new content, but I'm definitely using it as an editor. And,
Sure.
I'm not a native English speaker. I grew up in India, right? And so for
Yeah.
me, it's great. It's super helpful as, improving my grammar, improving my editing and tone. Um, so AI is definitely helpful. It's an accelerator. I think it's the same old, same old. If everyone is going to the same tactic, you then need to figure out how to stand out again. So this happens with every new technology cycle, right?
Yeah.
You remember the days of mobile, local, social, like that whole, and everyone was talking about that,
Yeah.
and it was like, okay, that just becomes mainstream, and then you find a new different way of talking about it, right? Then it's like influencer, okay, like now that's mainstream, like you got to find a new angle. Okay, now it's AI, okay, that's going to become mainstream, then you got to find a new angle. So I don't think it's
Yeah.
like, oh, like it's going to suddenly unveil some nirvana state for marketers. It's more like it's another thing. And yes, it's a platform shift. You figure out how to leverage that platform shift, great. But when it comes down to measurement, the fundamentals are still the same. Nothing's really changed. And you still have to figure out what is the cause and effect of what you're producing, right, in terms of the activity of marketers, and what impact is that having on your sales, on your pipeline, and your orders. And that is the billion-dollar question that every marketer wants to be able to solve for their execs, for their board.
Yeah, it's such a great segue into uh, marketing is not going to go away. Marketing is
Yep.
always there, and and that's what that's part of what Paramark is doing. But we have to realize like all these things are getting accelerated, and yeah, we need to learn how to use them, but there's a specific intuition that's built into marketing that you're always going to have, right?
Yep.
Like that no AI tool is going to be able to solve for, or any other measurement. And so you're going to have those people that have just kind of a pulse on what's going on to be able to go and make, to your point, make that shift, make that jump, saying, I think this is the next big move, right? Because AI is not going
Totally.
to do that for you. So I think that's a really good call out.
Maybe it'll get there. I don't know. But like the moment that happens, right? The moment we cross into that territory of you got true AGI that is better able to perceive human emotion and irrational thought and subconscious thinking, the moment you cross into that territory, okay, now we're talking about completely different paradigm. We're
Yeah,
talking about things plugged into our brain where we're like talking
yeah,
like aliens, right? Like
that's right.
and so I don't even think about that. I was like, how can you plan for a future like that? You can't. You will
Yeah,
not be successful if you think you're going to plan for that future. It's
absolutely.
just going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, a little bit of a tangent, but very fun information, very fun conversation. So let's get into attribution here.
Sure.
You were head of growth at Pilot, VP of marketing at Bill. Now you're co-founder running a marketing agent or helping an agency that helps marketers and CMOs and executives. Where at in this timeline did attribution from the marketing perspective begin to kind of settle in, saying, hey, we got to measure this in a specific way?
Sure. Yeah, so I was at a startup that got acquired by Bill.com, and that was my first sort of official VP marketing role. It was called Invoice to Go. It was selling to, sole props, mobile, but also web. Like half of it was web, half of it was mobile. And this is around the 2020 timeline. And trying to make sense of what's working, what's not working was not trivial. And if you remember, like iOS 14.5 was happening at the same time, and I was just, I had a team of product marketers, brand marketers, performance marketers, and everyone was kind of trying to figure out, okay, how do we accelerate growth? At the end of the day,
Yeah,
that was the problem. Where do we put in more dollars? And I had to show up at the board or with my CEO and be able to say confidently, hey, here's where we should invest more. Here's where we should, pull back. And the more I started to study every single channel and tactic, I was like, oh my God, this is hard. Right. And
mhm,
again, this is my first VP marketing role where I'm responsible for the entire budget. And we're talking about millions of dollars in across sort of headcount and program. And it wasn't easy. And you
yeah,
had to make a lot of leaps of faith. And I looked around at the state of the software that was there, both in the consumer mobile side as well as on the B2B, website. And I'm like, I wasn't very happy with what I had.
Yeah.
And so that was the first sort of, inkling that there's something broken in just the state of software. And it's different for every different type of business, right? B2B versus B2C versus consumer versus, retail, e-commerce, like the complexities add up. And then, one of the key things that happened was I would credit a lot of what happened to this guy. I'm forgetting his name. Refined Labs. Chris, is
Yeah.
that him? Chris
Chris
Walker,
Walker.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And at the same time, I was kind of looking at his content, looking at Dave's content, and just thinking about what are we really doing in marketing. And not everything is digital, even though we pretend like everything is digital. And you're only going to be able to capture things in a piece of software, and tie it back to a specific user identity for maybe 30 or 40% of your data. And there's
Yeah.
this vast, amount of data that is not digitally captured against an identity. And that opened my eyes to there's got to be different ways of looking at this problem. And went down a whole rabbit hole. And then 2 or 3 years later, when I was ready to start another company, talked to a bunch of my CMO friends and VPs of marketing, and ROI and attribution and measurement was still the number one issue on everyone's head.
Yep.
Even though we know that there's a lot of chatter about this on LinkedIn. It's like, you don't have to attribute everything. You don't have to measure everything. I'm like, talk to your CFO.
Exactly.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't think that's that's the right conclusion.
Yeah.
So,
It's such a good call out.
uh,
Like at the end of the day, as an executive, this is a great story, and I hope a lot of people are hearing this. Of like, executives have to report on budget. They have to report on revenue. Like the dollar is controls all of that. And if you just have a lackadaisical way of going about reporting on any of that, you probably won't have a job very long. Like it's just the reality of it. And it's not to say like attribution is
absolutely.
going to answer all the questions, but it helps get you in the right direction. It starts moving you there. I'm not a believer that multi-touch attribution or media mix modeling or the combination of the two is going to be able to answer all of your questions. So, like, to your point, not everything is digital. You can't magically insert everything into some kind of algorithm and get those answers, but it gets you moving in the right direction and feel a little bit more confident about what your decisions are. I think it's such a great
100%.
story.
I think confidence is at the center of it, right? If you can stand up confidently, truly confident, not like fake it till you make it, like you can truly confidently say to your board that, hey, I think, I have 80% confidence that we should invest in these three tactics in the next 6 months. That's our best use of capital. And if you're honest about it, then everyone's going to back you up and say, hey, Ian, go do that. And let's
Yeah.
see what happens. And then we'll reevaluate. And then taking a scientific method to it, right? So taking what that means is essentially those are all hypotheses. What you just said to the board, right? Hey, these are the three things that I want to double down on, increase investment. That's a hypothesis. It's not a slam
Yeah.
dunk. Now you go
Yeah.
prove or disprove that hypothesis and come back in 6 months and say, here's what we did. Here's the measured impact on the business. One of those three worked. Two of them did not work. Okay, now here's the next set of three ideas, and
Yep.
so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
you become much more of a, and I'm not saying that, okay, one of the things that I say to every customer is measurement is not going to solve your growth problems. It's all about the art and the creative and the
Yeah.
storytelling. Because without those, your measurement is useless.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. If you cannot, there's a story that in which you have to tell, right?
Yep.
And just like you're writing a book, if it is just very factual, no one's going to read your book, right? If it's just statement after statement after statement, no one's going to read that, right? You have to create a story, even if it's supposed to be a very, nonfiction book and it's supposed to be very factual. You still have to create a story there, right? And it's the same thing with data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what humans crave for, right? They are looking
Yep.
for that story. That's how we are architected. That's how we built. We want the surprise,
Yeah.
we want the delight, we want the emotion, we want the humor. And that's why I say, right, you got to have the art and the creative side of that. So a lot of marketers say, we're going to put a great foundation of measurement in place. And I say to them, actually, you know what? Put a great foundation of creative and storytelling first, because your measurement is going to be useless if you don't have good ideas and content going into the engine.
Yeah.
And so the combination of the two, right, art and science, and then if you have the capacity and capability to build your own DIY measurement, go for it. But if you don't, then go get, help, because that's not a core capability that's going to be impactful to your business. Your core capability has to be the storytelling.
That's right.
That's a non-negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the data can get you there. I worked with a few people through multi-touch attribution tool, Marketo Measure, right? But those that are most successful with it is exactly that, right? They're able to see all this data and they kind of do like, was it Russell Crowe in Beautiful Mind, where all the numbers, like he literally, they're able to see that and they're able to put all, like they can just put the picture together right away when they look at all the data. And that's what something I've shared on this podcast is start getting data people onto the marketing teams. Don't let them
Yes.
live on the data team. It's fine if they do, but if they can get into the marketing world, then they can start understanding, here's the picture, here's the story that I need to create, right? And it's just through osmosis of being on the marketing team, they can really begin to understand that and start creating better stories.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we doing at Paramark? What's the moves there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit of the backstory. So we've been in operation for about a year. We came out of stealth, I think like 6 months ago, September or something. We work with large scale companies, both on the B2C and the B2B side, and we're essentially offering a full holistic way of understanding your marketing effectiveness and efficiency across your paid, owned, and earned budget. And we're doing this through two fundamental technologies. One is MMM, so marketing mix modeling. The other is incrementality testing. And then a whole layer of, what I would call ease of use on top of that.
Yeah.
If you're new to MMM or incrementality testing, it can come across as very sort of arcane or hard to use, hard to interpret. There's like terminology that a lot of marketers are not exposed to, right? Even the concept of
Sure.
incrementality, the concept of, multivariate regression, these things are not sort of easy to grok. And so we're making it super easy to get onboarded into this way of looking at marketing and then helping you execute. So software plus service, classic sort of SaaS, and
Yeah.
a heavy dose of, customer service on top of that.
Yeah. So I'm seeing that a lot more. And let me ask you, with Paramark, is that B2B, B2C? Is that both businesses?
Our early customers are all across. So we've
Yeah.
got e-commerce companies, we've got B2B, pre-IPO companies, we've got public companies, we've got, consumer mobile companies, so
Yeah.
fintech companies. We're covering a pretty broad spectrum, which is counter to the advice that you get, right? Like focus on a specific niche. But the way we define sort of our ideal dream customer is, basically folks who are spending across 5, 6, 7 different channels and have reached that threshold of tens of millions of dollars in spend across those channels, where you've got top of funnel, you got bottom of funnel, you got brand, you got performance, you got online, you got offline, you got, right? And it's
Yep.
significantly harder to understand where to invest the next dollar. And
Yeah.
the reality is that the challenges and the pain points are the exact same, whether it's B2C or B2B.
Yeah. It's such a good call out. Two thoughts in that, just on that one immediately, is when you're spending that much budget, that's why people are buying MTAs or MMMs, because yeah, you don't know. And one of the very first things, and you're seeing this on LinkedIn a lot more, where they're like, I stopped spending money on Google. Well, yeah, because you're spending tens of millions of dollars on Google when you didn't need to, right? That wasn't the primary way. Like, it's not to say that it's bad to spend money there. It's just not that much money. You don't need to spend that much there, right? And
Exactly.
that's a big piece. The other one that I want to go back to is, and I really want to highlight this because I think it's so good. companies like Paramark.com and other ones, I'm seeing a growth in this, and it's so good. There is a mindset around different algorithms. I don't know the right term. You can call it out when you hear it, but these different methodologies that are statistically engineered, right? So these are all things that in the back end, that's what MMM's built on. So not all MMMs are the same because they have different infrastructures of how they're going to go about that data. Similar with incrementality, different infrastructures, and that's the same with AI. I want people to hear this.
Mm-hmm.
You could buy AI from one company, you could buy AI from another company, but AI actually on the infrastructure is built differently. And companies try to do that in-house and try to hire someone to build all that. And more often than not, that's just a failure. It's a lot of money. The ROI isn't there. To our very first conversation, I'm paying for this person and to accomplish this, or I can just go buy a product or pay for a group like Paramark to get the ROI, right? And that speed up to that is much faster. So I think companies like Paramark, when they can come in and have that statistical algorithm built on behind it rather than paying for someone, I think the ROI is there. I mean, obviously you have to get the right company like yourself, like Paramark, but I think if you're shopping around, those are the questions to ask. Like, what is this built on? What's the algorithm? What are those things? What's the right name, Pranav? I'm not getting the right name. What's the name of all that?
It's at the end of the day, it's a model.
Yeah.
So just like you have AI models, you have marketing mix models. And so every vendor has their own flavor of a model. Fun fact, Google has an open source model. Meta has an open source model. Uber has an open source model. There's another open source model out of Europe, developed by some folks called PyMC. So you've actually got a plethora of open source models, and then you've got proprietary models that people have, vendors have built themselves. So it's the exact same, analogous ecosystem to what's happening with Gen AI in this field of marketing mix modeling and incrementality testing. Even for experimentation, exact same thing. You've got a bunch of open source packages from Meta, from Google, from others that can be used to evaluate your marketing experimentation. So we are extremely committed to open source. We are probably one of the unique ones out there where we're building a commercial offering. We have a commercial offering, but for the benefit of our customers and avoiding vendor lock-in, we're actually using open source. And even when we build our own model, it will be open source. So you can sort of take that and go wherever you want. We think that that's the way that modern software should work. And, so I think over the course of time, the differentiation in the models is kind of going to go down to zero. And you can already see that even on the Gen AI side, right? They're all looking at the internet, which means the data is the same. And
That's right.
the competition is going to essentially reach a point where the efficacy of your Gen AI models is the same. And I think the same is going to happen in MMM and incrementality. The efficacy of the models and the strength of the models is going to sort of normalize. And then it's really about the level of sophistication, ease of use on top of the model of how do you make the data actionable. Do you actually have recommendations, or are you just like looking at the data for the sake of looking at the data because every morning we like to refresh the dashboard and see what's happened, but we don't do anything. It doesn't change behavior. So who can actually get you to change behavior in a way that drives net new revenue? And that is our focus, is make it really, really actionable.
That's so good. Yeah, it's a great call out of all these different models are built on just the internet that from 2017 and back, or whatever it was, whatever the stop date was, right? And I think that's another good call out. Something we often call out on this podcast is if your data is not clean. This is a very big MOPS focus, but if your data is not clean, again, you're thinking when you start ingesting these models into your data sources, it's only you can narrow that modeling down to saying only this data, how do we run these algorithms? But if it's messy and it's not clean, or you haven't had a good way of tracking all the different data points up to that point, even if you're not doing AI, collect the data now. Learn how to start collecting it now,
Exactly.
because you're going to use AI, right? You're going to get there at
Well
some
said.
point. So
And that is
with
exactly
that,
the true, yeah, it's exactly the same with measurement, right?
yeah,
People's like you and I have been in the industry. We know that every customer, when they start a measurement project, 60 to 70% of the data is not centralized. And
yeah,
you're like, how can that be the case in this day and age when you've got Snowflake and Redshift and BigQuery and Fivetran and right, all of these tools,
yeah,
Salesforce, CDP, like, and yet step one, get all the data centralized and cleaned. And that's something that, I'm pretty sure every vendor is adding on to their implementation and onboarding is step one, let's get the data
that's
organized,
right. That's
centralized,
right.
and cleaned up. Yep.
Yeah, I think you're going to start seeing more and more companies do that, have a system, a platform to centralize data, create a unique identified person or whatever, identifier. I think more companies are going to start shifting to that because they're going to have to deal with all these different data sources. And rather than telling them, hey, go deal with all these different data sources, they're going to say, hey, we have a solution for that. Here's this platform that you can ingest all this. I'm seeing that with multi-touch attribution tools. I'm seeing that with media mix modeling tools. The challenge with that I think is those become a little bit of a black box. So we're going to
Yeah.
have to get to a point where those become a little bit more open sourced, so people understand. Because again, you're not hiding anything new, right?
Nope.
You're not like, this is something that's been around. So why not open it up so people can see this is how you start mapping data? Because if you have the infrastructure and it's good and it's easy and streamlined, people are going to use it, right? So,
Totally.
all right, Pranav, thank you so much for being on. This was super knowledgeable for me. Obviously I nerd out about all of this, and I'm really excited to see where Paramark goes.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was great. Thanks.
Awesome.